So welcome everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in whatever part of the world. I'm Asim Razzaq, your host, and I'm joined by my good friend Razzaq Iqbal, who's the founder and CEO of Data Science Dojo. And we'll get into our introductions here shortly. So as you guys know, and everybody's aware that we are in this AI, LLM, generative AI gold rush. You've heard a lot about it. And one of the key topics that we wanted to cover today is around the ROI, the cost, which is not something that people consider upfront, but we believe will become the most important factor as to how you differentiate yourself against the competitors and really the longevity of your AI LLM programs. But before we do that, just out of curiosity, I'd love to have people type in which city, which country they're from. We love geographic diversity. So if you can take a couple of seconds and type that in, that would be great. And welcome to all of the live feeds. I guess this is being live fed in many, many places. So let's see. Okay, I think the chat seems to be disabled for some reason.
So Asim, I can tell you because on LinkedIn, I see, okay, let me see.
Okay,
Sweden
seems to be disabled for some reason.
So we have Sweden, Bogota, Colombia, Poland, Toronto, Jordan, Namibia, Ankara. So Asim, I can tell you because on LinkedIn.
I think your feed is now feeding in also, Raja. Unfortunately,
I stopped it.
So,
and we have Maharashtra, India. So we have quite a spread.
All right.
Okay. Oh, okay.
We have Tampa, Florida. This came in. Excellent. Wow. That is quite a spread for sure.
I see Maputo, Mozambique, and Mauritius, Belize. So yeah, quite a spread.
Well, thank you guys for taking time to do that. Let's dive into our intros here. So just by way of introduction, I'm Asim Razzaq. I'm co-founder and CEO of Yotascale. And I call myself a recovering engineer because I think my entire career has been spent building, scaling platforms. Prior to starting Yotascale, I was the head of platform engineering at PayPal and eBay. And that's where sort of my love-hate relationship with a lot of these economic challenges started, right? Because we all are aware of public cloud. You have to spend money there. You have to make sure you're efficient. And then, of course, now this is the next phase of that, because a lot of the AI LLM pieces do cost money. And at Yotascale, our mission is to help enterprises and companies of a certain size really reel in the economics of building their AI LLM capabilities and their cloud infrastructure. I think with that, I'll pass it on to Raja.
Okay, so Raja Iqbal, Chief Data Scientist at Data Science Dojo. I think people have been seeing me. I've been quite active on webinars for the last few weeks, but for those of you who are joining from other channels, not Data Science Dojo channels, I've been doing machine learning AI, and used to call it pattern recognition like a long time ago, right? So I've been doing this for quite some time, about half of my life I've spent in this space, so quite a long time. And I've been running this ed tech and services company now called Data Science Dojo, where we have trained quite a lot of people globally, around 10,000 people that we have trained in a face-to-face setting. So, I mean, 10,000 may not seem like a big number in a MOOC context, but we have trained quite a lot of people. And then lately, we have been actually involved quite a bit on generative AI, both on the building solution side and also on the learning side. We have launched our first bootcamp, perhaps the first bootcamp in industry for building LLM applications. So, Asim, over to you.
All right, thank you, Raja. So let's talk about the big idea here, right? So I think we all know that there is a lot of activity that's going on in this space, and when I say the space is specifically around generative AI, LLMs, I know that there is a initiative around this whole artificial general intelligence, but this is not going to be quite the topic of that. I think the focus is going to be LLMs and Gen AI. And one of the key insights and challenges that people are not quite realizing it's in the making is this whole mismatch between supply and demand. And what I mean by that is that with this, you can call it the arms race, with this acceleration of making sure that companies are able to build models, companies are able to pivot their technology to leverage this new wave of innovation, there is going to be a crunch. So the graph that you guys see here effectively is about the top and sort of the medium grade GPUs, right? So that's the supply part of it. And if you draw a line through it, you'll see that it's about somewhere every 2 to 3 years, the price performance ratio gets better, right? So you get twice the performance in 2 to 3 years type of a time frame, right? So it's a very linear approach, and there is no innovation that is in sight that's going to change this anytime soon. So that's point number one. The relevant point and the critical point is that, and I wish I had a graph that I could overlay on this, but it's easy to sort of imagine that the demand is exponential. So given the demand is exponential, the innovation is linear based on where we sit. We are already in this crunch phase. And a lot of the demand that is out there, you can imagine, is also being usurped or being leveraged by larger companies. So if you're a cloud provider, if you're a provider of large scale models, right, you really, really, really need these capabilities. So what does that mean? Right. So I think what that means is that there is going to be a price challenge. There's going to be a price pressure. And so even if you do get access to the capacity, you might have to pay a decent amount. So what that means is that the cost focus has to be front and center. This cannot necessarily be an afterthought. I understand that if you're early in the phase of some experimentation, maybe that's the case. And I can give you some anecdotes here, right? So, there is a number of startups that are out there. One of my good friends, he's a founder of a startup as well. And they've been in a situation where they had to shut down GPUs because they're a Series A type company and they can't afford to run this around the clock. And it cost them $2,500 one time when they forgot to switch it off, which is, again, it's not millions of dollars. In some cases, it's, for some companies, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. But there is already a gate, because when the next morning they went out to go get the additional GPUs, the cloud provider had actually a form that they have put in. So they're putting gates in there just so the supply just doesn't evaporate, right? So there's already some friction that is in the making here. So Raja, I would love to get your perspective based on where you sit. What are the ramifications of this supply demand crunch, and how soon or not are we going to see this turn into, I have to use this word, a bit of more of a crisis as opposed to, things are kind of hunky-dory right now.
Yeah, if I look at it from the AI and generative AI angle, so definitely the companies, they're beginning to actually bring in more AI workloads. So machine learning has been happening for quite some time. We have seen quite a bit of. Let's actually step back, right? So there is different kinds of you can have your machine learning workloads, and now most of them are actually moving more towards the GPU type workloads, right? So from the traditional that CISC versus RISC workload, right? So now most of them are moving towards GPUs, and with generative AI, a lot of it, when you have to fine tune the models and when you have to build models on your own enterprise data, that's definitely going to drive demand. And where it is headed, I'm not in that
prediction business. Really?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm more on the demand side of it than the supply side of it, right? So in the sense that, I'm more of a consumer of these technologies. So, but I see it increasing. Can I put a number like Moore's law or Huang's law? I don't have a Raja's law of, like that, right? I don't have it. But clearly, I mean, the demand is going to be increasing for sure because of the inherent nature of how these generative technologies they are built, and there are ways to actually harness, without doing more training. So I think let me step back once again, right? So there is the compute side of it, and there is the rest of the infrastructure, right? The storage side of it, you need efficient storage, you need search and vector databases and all of that, right? So there are techniques that are going to be compute heavy. So of course, there are techniques that will require more compute, and the compute need will increase. But there are techniques that actually are a workaround for avoiding a lot of compute in a specific generative AI, right? So, and then you are basically leveraging some of the efficient retrieval or storage mechanisms to actually bypass that compute. But it's one or the other. Definitely, demand is going to increase because it has the whole thing has just started. Everyone is figuring out how to leverage this for their enterprise in their enterprise setting.
It's early innings, and of course, we'll go through some of the techniques that people can use. Given, like, so okay, the question is like, what's the solution? Like, where do I go from here? And then we'll be covering a decent amount of that. And I think the rock and the hard place is that you can't not afford to leverage this technology because it is too good. I mean, there is a lot of hype cycle about a lot of different things, right? So, and we've all been through those hype cycles, right? They claim to be the best thing ever, but there is a decent amount here that is quite innovative and quite game changing. I mean, I think some people have kind of compared it to the advent of the internet, the advent of the iPhone. It's just at least at minimum at that scale, if not more. So for you to stay competitive, you really, really need to make sure that you are experimenting, you are leveraging this technology in the context of your domain, in the context of your business. But just for our audience, do remember, keep a close eye on the supply demand and make sure that you're thinking through some of that stuff in your strategy as you have more and more workloads that you have to train and experiment with. So I think with that, here is a pretty interesting chart, right? Raja, so we were just talking about there can be different methods, and the ecosystem, this is just a snapshot. So this is from Felicia, is actually one of the investors in Yotascale as well. So they are just talking about this evolving ecosystem. And this is as of August 7, 2023. That's the other thing I'm noticing a lot of people doing, because this stuff is changing so fast that people are having to timestamp it. And they say this information is 2 weeks old, or this information is a month old, or 3 months old seems like forever in this category. So I think some of the things here are you obviously have the GPU cloud providers, right? And these have trade-offs. So for our audience, again, if you're thinking about what you should use, maybe we can educate them a little bit here. So you have the GPU cloud, which means you can get the raw capacity from a cloud provider. I guess this is a step above go buy your own GPUs in your data center, which maybe very large companies can do, and which is what the cloud providers are doing. And then from there, it kind of goes up where you can have serverless GPUs, meaning that you don't have to worry about the infrastructure. So that's sort of similar to how serverless works. You can have inference that is more efficient. There is some acceleration, so it isn't as much cost there. You have models, so even GPT-4 APIs where you can get access to these models, and they charge you some amount of money to be able to use those. And then decentralized GPUs, right, which is whatever the unused capacity is for GPUs. I guess these providers are doing some arbitrage and bringing some low-cost GPU capacity for you. So I guess the question, Raja, would be, if somebody's thinking through this and they don't understand all of this and their head is spinning a little bit to say, okay, what do I do? How do I approach it? What are some scenarios and use cases that would be helpful? So as an example, I can see it there and would love for you to build on that is, if I'm a pre-Series A company, right? My biggest challenge at that point is I need to reach product market fit, right? I cannot go into building my own data center and procuring GPUs, and I'm not going to have the CapEx to be able to do that. So I think I do kind of need to, in that rush for product market fit, work at the maybe the model API level, right? Potentially. So if it would be great if you can run through some scenarios and advice as to where people are and what kind of technology they should consider based on the business problem they're solving.
Yeah, I think this is a tough one, Asim. And I'm assuming you're talking about, once again, in the AI and generative AI, because
That's
this
right.
discussion is old, right? So decades, maybe at least a decade old, right? So cost management in the cloud, right? So I mean, so that has been an issue, but specifically in the context of generative AI, I think know what your use case is. First, I mean, let me address this. You said that you have to timestamp it. The timestamp the information here. This is from this date because things are changing so fast. I actually did a post just this morning because OpenAI came out with fine tuning of GPT 3.5, and they are apparently the pricing that they are mentioning. It seems to be quite reasonable on surface, right? So and then it looks quite impressive, right? Because building a model from scratch, it can cost you tens of thousands of compute hours and non-trivial amounts, millions of dollars of expense. So that's there. Even fine tuning is actually quite hard, right? So going back to your question now, so you have to know what you're trying to do. So you have to know what the use case is. Is the application that you're building, so there are different trade-offs, right? So there is a cost trade-off, right? So there's a latency trade-off, right? So there's a accuracy trade-off, right? So there's
and there's a time to market trade-off
and time to market trade-off, right? So and really it's a very interesting engineering and business problem at the same time. So let's say you're building a conversational agent or maybe a recommendation system, right? So, and you have to provide answers in real time. If someone comes in, you want them to want to deliver recommendations in real time, or you have to provide responses in real time. So the kind of infrastructure you would need is going to be very different from, you're doing some offline processing and gathering insights and, and then surfacing those insights using a different infrastructure. So I think it's a lot of it is actually, I was in one of the webinars earlier this week. I was pointing this out. It is still 95% of this is still good old engineering, right? So if you are a good engineer, good architect, that is what is needed. I mean, you can be awesome in machine learning, but you have to have a good view of, the business, keep the business in mind and do engineering in a way that it is efficient, right? So, and you can go for fine-tuned models, but if you go there, are there any regulatory risks? Are there any compliance risks? If you go and upload your data in some cloud in a third party, I mean, can you do that, right? Are there going to be any IP issues, right? Can you do it in-house? Do you have to have the skills in-house or not? So I think there is a lot of factors that can be considered, and the options are there. It is just that you have to know your options. And definitely, it's not a purely technology problem. You cannot simply throw technology at, as fascinating as all of this technology looks, once you start getting into the details and start building non-trivial applications beyond, hey, give me a poem in the style of Rudyard Kipling. So when you go beyond that, it actually becomes very complicated. You have to worry about latency, accuracy, and cost, how many tokens you're passing, and all of that. So it's,
right.
Yeah.
So maybe, sorry, go ahead, Raja.
I'm saying too many things to worry about, actually.
There's a lot of things to worry about, but maybe we can make it a little bit simple. Maybe we can go down this particular thread, which is that based on where things are at, a lot of people, I think, will have some level of comfort with a model API solution, right? A GPT-4, especially if they're doing experimentation and let's call it like they're building some conversational agent. And it's absolutely true that you have to experiment to understand what the guardrails are and, where it's going to go off the rails and where it's going to stay within. And so this isn't, you can just start one day and switch it on and things are going to be fine, right? So I think on the model API piece of it alone, what are your thoughts on, there is the Llama 2 and the GPT-4, like there's an open source component, which you again have to manage, right? You can't just go and give it a bunch of tokens and charge for it. So like what is the factor of complexity that people would run into when they try to bring an open source model in-house and work with that, as opposed to something that's out of the box that's getting tuned on an ongoing basis? And again, this isn't to say one is worse than the other. This is simply, what are the scenarios to consider just in that particular genre?
I mean, I don't see this as any different from having a managed SQL database versus having a hosted, fully managed SQL database, right? So maybe there could be some nuances, but at a very high level. So if you bring in your own open source model and deploy it, and you're managing it, fine tuning it, of course you need to have some technical understanding of things. When you use something like GPT-4 or GPT 3.5 from OpenAI that is fully managed, we have used you can directly use OpenAI, you can use Azure OpenAI, and I think Amazon also actually allows you more in an e-commerce context. I think the Project Bedrock. So no matter where you're using, Cohere is there, right? So no matter what you're using, right? At the end of the day, it's a trade-off where it's costs. Of course, if you use some of the managed services tend to be a bit more expensive, right? So, and decide. I mean, are you here for a quick proof of concept? I mean, so you said pre-Series A, you have to go and you're raising Series A. Just go and build something using a managed service. Once you have the money, I mean, invest in-house, right? So invest in-house, because the longer term cost, actually, it can be, initially it may look like, but when the workloads, or bigger workloads come in, the costs can actually add up very quickly, very fast.
That's right. That's right. And I think Frank on the chat, he mentioned that it costs $100 million to train GPT-3. So I think there's an element of somebody's already done a bunch of training ahead of time. And if that use case is really, really good, why would you want to invest that kind of money to go do that? I mean, I think that's not apples and oranges, but it kind of speaks to the cost of getting some of these models. So there is obviously benefit in model APIs because there's a lot of investment, CapEx, OpEx that's gone into it. And I think I like your approach of, hey, don't build it to scale from the start, right? You need to experiment and understand some of this technology and really understand the use cases that you're trying to deliver before you make it more optimized. And I love again, we're both engineers at heart, the analogy of like, this is 95% good old engineering, right? So just because the genre or domain has changed doesn't mean that now you're going to go do something radically different, right? So you need to have the same discipline of architecture, design, understanding the business use case, what problem you're solving. So all those are very, very relevant.
Yeah. So I would like to add one thing, Asim, here, right? So the foundation models that OpenAI and Cohere and Google, all of them are offering, and Facebook Llama 2, they are great, but they are only great when you are there is because they are trained on publicly available data sources, right? So, and then if you have something that is proprietary, right? So you have some legal documents, you have a lot of other data that is proprietary. These models can help you offer the language or the semantic context of it. And then there are different approaches. You can take these models and extend them, or actually take these models. An extension is, you can actually fine tune the models by adding your data into these models, or you can actually use these models for the language component and then bring the knowledge component from your own private data repository, and then sort of use them in conjunction with each other, right? So yes, there are cases then where off-the-shelf models may not actually work. If it is something very specific to your company that OpenAI is not aware of, then of course you won't get the what you want out of these models.
That's fair. And I think just the last point I'll make on this slide is that it's always a time to value, speed, experimentation. The trade-off is against, again, how much do you want to scale the cost, right? So at the bottom of here, you can go buy your GPUs, put Llama open source on it, and go build that whole stack. If you guys are if the company is very technical and has the CapEx and has a very unique use case that's not covered by some of the stuff where they might have to modify Llama as an example, you could still start with that as a basis, possibly, right? Because it's open source. Then that's one use case. The other use case is, okay, the competitor is the race and they are already implementing conversational AI into their offering, and that's what everybody's expecting. So you have to start somewhere fast, and you have to iterate fast, so that you can at least go make sure that you don't lose market share and you continue to keep your competitive edge. Just as sort of two ends of the spectrum use cases there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good. So, Asim, there is an interesting question in Q&A. If you want to take a look.
Yes.
I can read it out if you want.
Yeah, go ahead, Razzaq.
So, do we have data on how much Microsoft, Apple, and Google is spending on the race merely from a consumption point of view? There was an article that Microsoft's operational cost has gone up quite a bit. So it certainly actually reminded me of another company that has benefited the most out of all of this, which is NVIDIA, right? So yes, right. Yes, all of these companies, at the end of the day, many of these cloud service providers, they are in the business of renting infrastructure, right? So they are not, Microsoft and Amazon, if you look at the AWS rather, if you look at them, they are renting you infrastructure, right? So, and for them, they buy this from a lot of hardware from NVIDIA and then rent it out. So of course, their operational cost is going to go up for two reasons. One reason, of course, is that they are adopting generative AI internally, right? So their R&D cost and all of that will go up. And then also, if they have to serve customers who are, Microsoft now offers Azure OpenAI, AWS also offers many of these foundation models. When they have to serve customers, of course, they need that hardware in their data centers. So without a doubt, these companies are placing orders that are in tens of billions for NVIDIA GPUs. So that's that mad rush that is unfolding right now as we speak.
Yeah, and to kind of to that question, we don't know the exact answer, but I think if I was to guess, we're talking about at least hundreds of millions of dollars here, right? So if you just took as an anchor what it took OpenAI, and so this is not going to be cheap, especially for cloud providers, right? Because the scale at which they are operating is quite intense. I think there's another question, and we'll kind of look at these questions along the way. Around, is it fair to say that the phenomenal funding that AI companies are getting is more like the initial thrust needed for the lift up and may not be an indication of the great application of Gen AI that they are coming up with? So I think I would go back to sort of the analogy that Raja used, right? Like you have to kind of use common sense here, which is, again, a lot of this is, he said, this engineering and 95% of it. So I think a similar thing here is that when there is transformational technology, you will have a lot of companies getting a lot of funding because people are just trying to figure out what new innovation that can come through, right? And there is going to be a cottage industry across the board, because if you look at the whole stack, there are companies that are going to claim to do it better. They're going to make it more productive. They're going to try to help you deploy your own models faster. There'll be tooling around it. So I think that's what you're seeing, in a gold rush. The picks and shovels, they go for they go for a lot, right? That's the part of it. But I do think that companies that are solving real problems, right, with the real technology and depth, will certainly they will disrupt industries. I have zero doubt about it, right? I actually believe that every single industry will get disrupted in one way, shape, or form. So if you're a laggard, you're a sort of a legacy company, you've kind of been in let's just, for the sake of discussion, pick healthcare, right? And that industry has not changed as much over many years, although many companies have tried to do that. I believe that the pace at which this technology is evolving, sans the regulatory stuff, sans the security pieces, right? Because you got to be very careful when you kind of talk about healthcare. There will be some companies that will emerge that will solve some amazing use cases there, like preventative healthcare, just taking a barrage of data and coming up with inferences and predictions on, longevity and stuff like that. This is one example. So, like in any gold rush, you'll have a lot of people going in, but that does not mean you can't have either. You can't say, well, is most of it going to be garbage? No. Is all of it going to be great? No. But there will definitely be use cases that will be industry changing, in my view, in a lot of different industries, and we already see that. All right, keep the questions coming. They're great. I think there's another one.
If there are more questions, if you're ready, let me know. I will just.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think let's maybe get through some of the couple other places, and we can leave a decent amount of time for going through the Q&A. But please post your questions, because we will go back and go through them. All right, interesting questions. So I think this slide is simply talking about, with the emergence of this stuff, right? Like who owns this infrastructure, right? Who's responsible for managing the cost of this? Because now we have, the traditional platform engineering, also known as, I know people get all sensitive about the terminology, but also known as DevOps, right? But the goal of that particular group is really to make the engineering and application teams around them productive, right? So they make the infrastructure easy. They provide all of the different tooling. It's a central team. So they're measured by how productive can you be. In the middle now, we have the MLOps. And I think MLOps was already kind of there for a while. And now there's kind of somewhat of a new entrant called LLM Ops, which candidly to me is, you can call it AI Ops, right? I mean, we don't need to create like too many different frameworks here. And then there is the data science team, right? So the question is, how do these teams interact, and how do people think about it as to where the infrastructure belongs and where the where the models belong, like who owns the budget? I don't know, Raja, are you seeing, as you're interacting with some of the organizations, and I'm happy to provide my feedback on this, as to how the organizational part of this is evolving?
Okay, so it is evolving, right? So as you noticed in this space, there are actually a lot of interesting areas. Let's look at LLM Ops, right? So I agree with you that it is an extension of MLOps with some interesting, I would say, extensions, as this is an extension of MLOps, right? So for instance, right? So explainability and bias and fairness, that was always part of MLOps, right? So and now if you're a company that has let's say a big enough company that cares about PR, right? So now should you invest in LLM Ops or not? I would say absolutely you have to, right? So it may sound like an area that maybe we'll start, well, we will worry about the rest of the technology first and then go to LLM Ops. But if you look at it, your model can actually potentially, it's a language model, and people can deceive it into responding in a way that you don't. So let's say company X, a few billion-dollar company, they have a chatbot deployed using one of the LLM technologies, and I go and I deceive it into revealing some information, right? So maybe somewhere some data sources that it had access to, it was prompted not to give you that information, but it gave you that information. Maybe something that is politically incorrect, right? So there are actually new areas that are emerging, specifically in LLM Ops, that have a significant potential of doing a lot of damage. Then the companies right now, where they are investing, I would say, barring some of the top companies, most are actually trying to invest and figure out how to use this efficiently. Based on the customers that we have interacted with on the services side of our business, most companies actually, so there are there are two cases. Hey, can we use this for, they have something in mind. They want to use LLMs and generative AI for their business. And the others have very specific use cases, right? So some just want to use it because they don't want to, miss out on this. Others, they have very specific use cases. And within those specific use cases, as soon as you start building an application that is somewhat non-trivial, the complexity actually becomes very, it grows. It's very easy on one hand to, go to ChatGPT and construct a clever, response and then just post it on social media. But when you're creating a database, when you're creating as your CRM system, when you want to build a system that responds to a customer in an automated fashion, right? So, or you're hitting a structured data source and you're trying to build a natural language querying interface, the kind of challenges that you run into, they're significantly harder than just, hey, ChatGPT, create me a social media post for me that I need to post, right? So it is actually, the challenges are quite different and lots of moving parts.
Yeah, I think that begs the question again on, right, because you have platform engineering, and one could potentially argue that it's LLM ops or ML ops is an extension of platform engineering, because at the end of the day, it's a framework and it has its guardrails. And it is, how do you go from concept to deploy and then iterate? Like what does that look like, right? So what we are kind of discussing here is like, is that a different group, or is that something that platform engineering will eventually sort of own? And then of course you have the data science group. I think to me, this is interesting, right? Because it's you can say data analytics, right? So those groups are going to be leveraging this quite a bit. So they are certainly customers of this, right? So it at least to me doesn't make sense that this would fall into a data science group just given the skill set. Now that can be controversial, and I'm sure there's data scientists here and then all of that stuff, right? Certainly for rapid experimentation, certainly if it's a Skunksworks project, but when you're talking about scale and what the infrastructure needs to do, because we spoke about things like latency, we spoke about security, we spoke about sort of a lot of those elements that a team that is owning the framework and all aspects of it, reliability, right? None of those go away. So anyways, I see some spark in your...
data prediction is there. Reproducibility is a major challenge, right? So
right.
Accuracy is a major challenge. So, when you're dealing with language, so maybe one word being substituted with another doesn't matter much. But when you are actually numbers, 2.5 is different from 2.51, right? So, so those kind of, when you're, as I said, right, so any serious application, you can substitute one word for another, but you cannot substitute one number for another number, right? So, and then maybe if you're substituting another word for a word, what if it is not a politically correct word, right? What if it is an offensive word, right? So many things. It is not purely a technology problem. There is a lot more. You have to have an understanding of the bigger picture of the business as well, right? So yeah, so.
You have to then have a framework, right? So this is the good old the quality part, right? Of what is the quality and accuracy, as we said, that's coming out on the other side, right? And that's not. The fundamental problem might be more complex or different, but people have to deal with that kind of stuff to some extent in their applications also, right? They have to verify the data, and if you are a company that is involved in some financial number crunching as a service, right? Your numbers can't be wrong either, right? So, is that more the quality assurance piece of things, or is that, again, you need frameworks and you need test-driven type of development, things of that nature, or is that something completely different?
Quality assurance is actually a very difficult area. It's evaluation of your models in LLMs. It is actually a significant challenge, because reproducibility and experiment design is a major challenge, because you can design an experiment on things that you can control, right? So that's, a classic statistical, in statistics, when we say we are designing an experiment, you actually design experiments while controlling some variables. In this case, how do you control things, right? So how do you control the responses? Because it is a lot of it is actually probabilistic, right? So with LLMs, I mean, your responses vary exactly for the same prompt from one prompt to another. So you ask the same question followed by the same question, it might give you a different answer, right? So
Right.
So there is a lot of quality assurance issues. So these things may be acceptable in one domain, but for another application, this lack of reproducibility, it may not be acceptable.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I'm assuming that these will become disciplines and frameworks, right? That things have to go through, similar to how traditionally things are, that they do go through checks and balances and before the final product goes out. And again, it's an emerging space, so you will have to kind of think through that. And I think at the end of the day, the point of this slide was, okay, well, who's responsible for the cost of this stuff, right? Like who gets the bill, who gets yelled at the end of the day? And I think that is what we're also trying to say is that's a little bit unclear at this point. And it to me reminds me of the initial wild west on the cloud side, right? So we had this whole emergence of FinOps and as a whole discipline, and the roles and responsibilities were clear. But in the early innings of FinOps, in the cloud context, it was basically bill shock was happening, and somebody was just spinning up machines in some part of the company because they could, and sometimes they were swiping a credit card and just doing that. So I think it's going to be, as they say, deja vu all over again when it comes to sort of this piece of it, until there can be some rules around, okay, who owns it, who's got the budget, how are we measuring the ROI around this? And we'll get into some techniques there, right? Because there is always a point at which the CFO will have that, that bill shock moment, and they will come down and basically say, what are we doing, right? And why is it happening? And I think with the lack of roles and responsibilities, the accountability becomes hard. Like, who do you go after?
The soul has some great texture to it, which gives you very that's what that is.
Okay. All right. To mute someone. All right. So I think just sort of moving on, we can talk about, just in the interest of time, sort of the domain that we live and breathe, which is around all of this FinOps in the traditional cloud, but also now for LLMs. So as we are talking to some of our existing customers, which include the likes of Zoom and Okta and Aflac and others, right? We're people are in early experimentation, but they have this, because they've seen the bill shock in the cloud, right? They are a little bit worried about what's going to happen, right, in this domain. And this is back to the basics, right? This isn't a 70-point slide or anything. It starts with visibility. The very first thing you have to understand is, where is the money going? We call it attribution, right? And I think in this space, when you're talking about LLMs, you have to figure out, okay, first of all, which group, which team, which business unit owns the model? I think the sooner you start thinking about this stuff, the further along or better you're going to be in terms of managing and reeling in the costs. And attribution then can be, okay, what if there are multiple models, how much are they costing? What are the data pipelines costing? What is the inference costing, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're trying to do an ROI and you're saying, well, I'm building this conversational AI, let's say it sits within a particular group, right? Conversational AI chatbot, and it's your bill for all of this stuff ends up being $750K, just as an example, right? You're going to have to really, really understand, how did you rack up that bill? Where did the money go, right? And if you don't have the level of understanding, then there'll be a world of hurt, right? Because then the organizational sort of budgetary things come down on you. And so I think the first step is understand the cost of what you are doing. Even if you're in experimentation, you want to have that. And also, I know it's hard to budget, but at least have some sense of budget on experimentation. So at least if you go over it, and if you're tracking it, then you can take some measures and you can give a heads up to the powers be to say, look, we're going beyond what we thought, and here are the reasons why. So that explainability is going to be very, very important. As I say, you can't really optimize something you can't measure. So that's the first discipline. The second one is like, how do you optimize for value, right? So this is back to what is the ROI you're getting, right? You can't just be experimenting for the sake of experimenting. If you're in a company, you're running a business, right? And you cannot be in a wild, wild west, because ultimately this will impact the bottom line and top line of your company. I mean, we are in a macroeconomic scenario where all of a sudden everything has gone from growth at every cost to profitability and margins, right? And every single investor, Wall Street, everybody is focused on making sure that you have value, you have margins, you are running the business efficiently. And as this line item starts becoming a big part of your overall financial health, then having that discipline within the team in the context of FinOps is going to be very, very important, just so the question on value is being discussed strategically, proactively. Because I think what we've seen is that a lot of this stuff becomes reactive and it's after the fact. And then people are just scrambling and they're fixing things, and they're not setting the right expectation and having the strategy around it. And then the final one is operate with agility, right? So there's an absolute recognition that if you have too many guardrails and too much sort of budgetary stuff and a lot of this bureaucracy, then you're not going to be able to experiment fast. So you have to come up with a model where the data is transparent, everybody understands it, and that you can do things at a fast clip and not have, let's call it a FinOps group or a finance team, always be in your way. Because I think the more you can make that information democratized, that it's understandable, I think the better off you will be in terms of continuing to do your experimentation and continuing to create value for the company. So I think that's a larger sort of FinOps concept. We don't have enough time to go into every single detail because it's a whole discipline that I think some folks are familiar with. But the connection I'm making is that the whole LLM generative AI piece of it is simply an extension of that discipline. All right, so I think with that we will move on to some more finer grained strategies, right? So if you are building these models, what do you do, right? And I think Raj, I'll kind of hand the baton to you there to kind of talk a little bit about what are some of the basic things people can think about in this context.
So I think it is once again the good old engineering, or I would say good old cloud management, cost management. Nothing changes actually. There is very little that is changing, maybe a few technical things. And I would say the fundamentals remain the same, even forget about cloud engineering, right? So, or cloud architecture, right? So in our life, right? So, what we don't measure, it doesn't get managed, right? So for know what the costs are, set up alerts and all of that, right? So that's very important. So if something goes south right away. Then right size resources, right? So if you cannot afford like a 5-bedroom house, move to a condo, right? So don't over allocate resources. So that's definitely there, and that principle applies there. There are things like auto scaling, using containerized implementations. You can't go wrong with that. No cloud pricing models. Sometimes, I mean, the same thing you're getting here, if you can get the same thing at, at Walmart, don't go to Nordstrom, right? So, it's basically the idea is there are idea of spot instances, go use spot instances, right? So there is use serverless architecture. So I think all of those things, and know the pricing, know your business case. Some of the sneaky things are actually in general in the context of clouds, and then I will mention them in the context of generative AI. We have found, I mean, I personally found storage to be a very sneaky. A few cents per gigabyte. What's the big deal? And you realize that you have been paying, a company our size, maybe maybe $1,000 a month for storage, for storing something that you did not need. It is just some automated backup that someone set up and forgot about it, right? So, those kind of things. Data transfer costs, optimize your architecture in a way that, you're not paying for a lot of data transfer costs. Allocate resources, I mean, tagging them properly so you can hold people accountable. Accountability is going to be important. Going to generative AI and large language models, right? So in that case, know when to use when to use a 4K token limit or versus 16K token limit or 32K token limit or maybe 100K token limit, right? So no, because you are if you do not need something something that is with a bigger context window in the context of LLM or a foundation model, don't go there, right? So understand why you need something before you start using it. So I can keep going, as Asim, you said. I mean, we can spend an entire day here.
Yeah. That's that would be like there could be a follow up on this, right? I mean, I think to your point, you have to understand the price drivers, right? Because if you don't understand the price drivers, then you're going to be constantly in a world of hurt, and that's where that's important, right? Because I think it's a great example you use on storage, right? It's very similar in generative AI, where you start it's cents per gig, and we've had customers who've had a petabyte plus and tens of thousands of dollars, and literally nobody knows why the stuff was getting stored. So I think cloud and a lot of these models psychologically give this people this interesting sense of an endless, bottomless, infinite set of resources, right? And that's just not the case, right? So it's almost like you're back into for people who can remember some of the stuff when memory RAM used to be expensive, and you used to think in your computer and your PC like how much RAM you're going to put, right? And because that could get fairly expensive fast. So I think that's one. The additional stuff that we also mention is that, you know, in addition to leveraging products that can do this for you, because it's the FinOps is certainly becoming a key pillar of managing stuff, is, you know, you need to also have people who have that mindset, right? So what I say is that it's performance, reliability, security, and now cost. That's the fourth key entrant, the fourth key pillar into the equation, right? And so if you can find people who have some level of experience and who have that understanding that systems have to be designed, they have to be tracked, they have to be monitored with respect to that fourth pillar, then you're going to be that further along. It's not easy to find those people, that many people like that today, but potentially, even if you put it in your interview processes, you're hiring engineers or you're hiring key people, right, to see, do they have any experience, right, in terms of keeping an eye on it. So I think those are some of the things that will be quite useful. As you said, this is an ocean, right? There's a lot of things, but certainly you can't go wrong if you just simply understand the price drivers, do that competitive shopping, and just track, right? It starts with very simple tracking, and then you can go finer grained.
So Asim, I would like to add actually one more thing, right? So we at Data Science Dojo, anyone who gets hired, right? So we have this, a presentation or a series of tutorials on our culture, right? So one key element of our culture is what we call the freedom, responsibility, and accountability, right? So of course, if you, as a company, if you're trying to use LLMs, you want people to give the creative freedom, go do whatever they want to do, right? But there has to be a sense of responsibility and a swift accountability that has to be there, because cloud costs, I mean, we have been bitten by this, right? So because people have to exercise their freedom very responsibly. So make sure that your resources and costs are allocated, properly, resources are tagged, resource groups are created, and people are held accountable for the cloud usage. If it is going for innovation, absolutely, by all means, if your company can afford it, right? But if it is just because someone is lazy not to actually clean up after themselves, you have some thinking to do, right? So
for sure,
you need to.
That makes perfect sense. And our experience at Yotascale, working with a lot of customers, is that ultimately there can be no accountability without attribution at a certain scale. So if you don't know who owns it, like, you don't know who to go after, right? And that's where shining a light on, okay, which team is using it, and having a transparent culture is very, very important. Okay, I think with that, we can talk a little bit about, before we get into Q&A, so where do we go from here, right? Where can people learn more? What's the kind of the next phase, next step of this? Just in terms of, okay, yeah, I wanna use these. I'm already using this, or maybe I'm a little more advanced. Like, what are some of the ways that people can go double click on this topic. So I'll let you start, and then I have some thoughts, and we can go to the Q&A from there.
Okay. So I think
resources, other strategies. I mean, obviously, we this cannot be an all exhaustive, comprehensive, right? And again, we can do a follow up down the road. But what will be our parting advice? Some people like, okay, here's where you learn more.
Okay. So I think in terms of there are tons of resources, right? So I was for another project I was working on it, right? So and then all the cost optimization strategies. I think one of the skills that is very, very underestimated is actually doing a quick web search, right? So there are so many wonderful resources that are available out there, and now I include that Chat GPT as that skill. I use it on a daily basis. I mean, I'm not ashamed of that, right? So but I use my common sense as well. I mean, so it actually helps me put things in the right context, and as long as, I mean, same goes with Stack Overflow, right? So you should be actually using it very frequently, but you should be able to you should have enough skill to know to tell the right answer from the wrong one, right? So don't copy the wrong answer from Stack Overflow, right? So same goes with this. So start with that, right? So there is tons of resources, and Asim, I was caught off guard because I should have actually brought in some resources. I cannot think right now.
We can follow up also, right? I mean,
but there is actually tons of resources. If you're the first search that you do on cloud cost management, that would help you with that. And the fundamental principles of cloud cost management, I do not think they're changing.
That's right.
Nothing is changing. Maybe a little bit of a few things that are very, very generative AI specific, but the principles, forget about cloud cost management. I mean, the overall overarching cost management principles, they don't change, right? Accountability is important, right? Attribution is important, right? So downsizing is important, right? So all of those principles, right? So don't do things that are obviously wrong. And then, of course, there are certain things that you can only understand. They're somewhat technical, like auto scaling or spot instances or reserved instances, right? So there are different pricing tiers that the cloud offers. Be able to compare, different offerings and know what you want. So there is some technical information. You need to have some technical people who can compare. Well, if we use this model that is giving us, 10% lower, or this infrastructure that is giving us 10% lower cost, I mean, would that work in our scenario or not? And then go for that resource. So some of those common sense things, I think, that's how I would go. Asim, you have anything?
Yeah, that's helpful. That's fair. And I think just it's interesting that a lot of these conversations are even happening on Reddit, on Substack, right? So I think those are the places additionally to go there. And since we live and breathe this domain, again, it's not a sales pitch or anything. We have a resources section on Yotascale/resources, right? So if you want to learn about the general principles, you can go there. You can also find similar resources in other places as well that can give you like just a blueprint, right? Like here are the 3 to 5 things you need to be thinking about as you do this. And I think I guarantee you that you'll be ahead of 95% of the people if you take a little bit of time and just get yourself more literate around how do you reel this in, right? Because you will be that evangelist, you will be that person that people would go to, because I guarantee you this is already an existing problem and it's only going to get worse. So people who know how to address it, who have some war wounds, who've kind of done it experientially, as opposed to they were just sitting on the sidelines and saying, well, we'll deal with it when it becomes a major problem, right? That's going to do wonders in terms of your contribution towards your company, your team, and just the vision that you want to achieve. So I know we're right about at 11. We can dive right into questions, and people feel free to stick around. I mean, certainly we can stick around for a few minutes, Raja, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay. So maybe we can sort of take some from the webinar, take some from the live feed.
I think the live feed is also being posted here. So
got it. Okay, so that's great. Yeah. That's great.
So let me start here where we left off. So Mahidhar, there's a question. What are some ways to compensate for bias that is present in the data itself and creating an LLM-based application? So Mahidar, maybe what I would say is that this question may not be specifically in this context, but let me just give a quick 30-second answer to this, right? So you cannot. So there will always be bias, right? So you have to be watchful, because what does bias even mean, right? So something that is acceptable to me living here in North America may not be acceptable to someone living, sub-Saharan Africa or maybe South Asia, right? So, I mean, so there are some social, cultural, family context, so many norms there. It is just that you have to actually be mindful and come up with something. There are some core human values, and then beyond, maybe even that would be subjective, right? So you have to actually adjust your data, make sure that, and there are some tools, by the way, that actually help you identify those issues in your data. So this is, would you compare the cost of fine-tuning LLM on Hugging Face, AWS, Google, GitLab, and others? Which one would you suggest as a startup to start first? Honestly, I do not know. I have not, unless I have explored all of them, I have no idea. So it would be, I think you should do some benchmarking, do some reading, and because to be able to answer, I have to know all of their pricing models and everything. I mean, I would say maybe fine-tuning is not the answer, right? So maybe you don't need fine-tuning of the model. Let me see.
Yeah, there's another question here that I can read off. So have you guys ever had the challenge of trying to marry generative AI and green ops? Given the high compute consumption of training new models, I'm curious if you have any practical tips. For example, how GCP is using a region like US Central 1. You're looking at a very generous region in GPU, and also at one of the greenest ones that this cloud provider has to offer. So, I mean, at Yotascale, one of the things that we do focus on is just the environment aspect of things, right? So carbon emissions, and it's amazing to me how much wastage there still is. Having said that, to your point, there are cloud providers that are taking steps. So there are regions that are greener than others. There might be some basic trade-offs there. In some cases, you might have to pay a little more. I don't know exactly how that works, but certainly GCP is, I would call them a leader in terms of cloud providers in this. But Microsoft, AWS, they're also taking steps in that, in a similar spirit as well. So I think we're trying to build capabilities where we can make it easier for people. We can give you the trade-off between the dollar amount versus, how bad it is for the environment. And that's an ongoing thing that we are doing here at Yotascale. But I think in the absence of that, you already made this great comment, right? That the cloud provider gives you, from a region availability zone point of view, what is the footprint. So it's similar to, like, if you go purchase an airline ticket, now they can give you a carbon emission for the flight you're going to be on. And I think it's not at the level of granularity of every single resource, but it is a good enough granularity where you can consider yourself as being a good citizen of this earth, right? If you go choose the ones that are not spewing as much carbon. And candidly, I am quite alarmed and worried about this aspect of things. That's kind of near and dear to my heart, because I think this whole race is only going to just expedite sort of more data centers and more GPUs and more of that stuff. And the challenge with that is, you can have regulations in certain countries, but not in other countries, right? Where the stuff and infrastructure can be set up. So there have to be also larger policy things. If you're a Fortune 100, Fortune 500 type company, I know for sure in those companies, ESG is being talked about, right? So environmental, social governance, and E is pretty key part of that. And so if you happen to be in one of those companies, I think you can certainly raise the awareness, because they will have an incentive to go do something about it as well. So hopefully that answers the question on some of the things you can do in order to make the planet greener. All right, Raja, your turn to pick something.
There was actually one more question from Shamshad, right? And this is directed at you, Asim, and maybe I can chip in if needed. Just like we saw DevOps becoming DevSecOps and MLOps, what sort of underlying changes you see necessary for retooling the observability, telemetry, etc., from both quality, stability, as well as cost management perspective? What will be the new form of SLAs and usage-based billing? Very interesting question from some.
Yeah.
From you know, you
Yeah.
personally
So I
see
think
yeah.
I can predict the acronym. That's always hard to predict. But I think just you can see that DevOps going to DevSecOps and this whole MLOps, they're underlying saying something, right? The point is that the developer should be focused on security, and it's a shift left, right? That it should not be an afterthought, right? And it just brings it front and center. MLOps is basically surfacing that you need a whole framework and a set of tools in order to basically do machine learning. So you have MLOps stacks, it's a discipline, it's a genre, it's a domain, right? And so we touched on some of this stuff earlier, right? So there's this evolution of at least the concerns, and Raja mentioned this, right? Which is, what's the quality of my model? What is the output? You know, can a word be replaced? So that at least today is being called LLM ops. I mean, you can insert a sec in there because you have to be secure, right? There have to be some level of governance. And so I think you will most certainly see an emergence of frameworks and tooling that will cover the operations of, let's just call it generative AI, right? The question that we were trying to answer earlier was, does that sit in platform engineering? Is that an extension of platform engineering? Does that sit in data science? Does that sit in the business analytics team? Or is there a group that is completely different? There are elements of skill sets that are different in my view, right? But the basics are not going to change. I guarantee you. The basics of whether you call it LLM ops, whether you call it ML ops, is ultimately you have to track. You have to track usage. You have to look at the telemetry. Again, at Yotascale, we're actively working on building capabilities where you can look at things at a model level. You can look at things at a data pipeline level, right? Because I think there are levels at which you need to answer those questions. And SLAs are going to be important, right? I mean, Raja even mentioned latency, right? So it's if you're in a conversation, it depends on, again, all of those applications, the basics don't change. Reliability, performance, cost, security. They will always be there, right? So if you're in a conversation, it's a chatbot. Can your response wait for 5 minutes? Probably not, right? If it's some offline data processing and giving you some insights using LLM, sure, it could be a day. So I think those things going to be there, but it's candidly, it's such a fascinating, evolving, emerging space that my biggest piece of advice would be that if you're really interested, you have to keep tabs on it, right? But at the same time, when in doubt, bring the fundamentals into the equation. Don't overcomplicate it. Anyways, that's my more than 2 cents there.
Yeah, and I think it's more about, I mean, if you look at MLOps or DevOps originally, right? So it is basically what's the end-to-end life cycle of your software, and then what is the end-to-end life cycle of your model, and now what's the end-to-end life cycle of your large language model, and any variables that emerge, right? So you're still tracking your code. You still have a Git repository, right? So you have software versioning, but in addition to that, for instance, right? So, and you're monitoring, in MLOps, you would be actually perhaps monitoring the version of your model, what was the accuracy and precision, recall, and all of that, right? So now, if you keep going, then in LLM ops, there are some new issues, right? So think about that all of these are extensions of each other. Now I was looking at it. Now you're monitoring the versions of the prompts that you had in the system, right? So, and you're also there are different needs in terms of model explainability, observability, and all of that, right? So there will be new things that are going to be added, as new layers to what we know as MLOps. I think it's a few new things that are unique to LLMs that you will be adding. So I think these are natural progressions of each other, and new forms of SLAs, right? So I think they're going to be dictated by the business need, what kind of application, what you're building. So I would say certain things are going to be constant, and others going to be very depending about what kind of application you're building.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have the age-old cost SLA trade-off, right? Nothing is nothing's free. You always have to do that. So I think one of the questions here is towards the end is using cloud in businesses that produces huge data like telecom is not an option due to the high cost, while on-prems require high expertise. What do you think? I think this goes back to the use case, right? So I think it's hard to answer the question because the question is, what is the telecom using this for, right? And you can still have a large amount of data, but you can always start building your expertise in the cloud version of these model APIs, and you don't have to feed it every single last byte of data, as an example, right? So you take a very small subset of the data, you train stuff on it, you learn through the process, and again, when you really need to expand it to large amounts of data, that's where you scale. And at that point, hopefully you are literate enough. I mean, I wouldn't go from zero to like, okay, we're going to build this all on-prem from scratch from the ground up because we have a large amount of data. I really highly encourage even large companies that you can experiment a lot with a subset of your data that's not going to break the bank with some of the latest and greatest technology out there before you have the skill set and an understanding of how to bring it in-house. And you see this in some cases in repatriation, right? So there were companies who had a huge footprint in the cloud and it was getting very expensive. But as an example, some of those companies were very storage centric. They left everything in the cloud, but brought storage back into on-prem. But at that point, they had a good understanding what the architecture is, things of that nature. So I think that's sort of my thought process on how a company should think about it, and like don't chew off more than you can digest. All right.
Okay, I think we are way over time.
We are.
Yeah.
Well, I think with that, we'll conclude. We have a recording. Some people asked if that's going to be available. So we'll certainly make that available to everybody. If you have other questions, reach out to us. Raja, Data Science Dojo, and Asim at Yotascale. I'm sure we have LinkedIn pages, Twitter. So go seek us out. And I enjoyed the conversation quite a bit, Raja, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time.